Welcome to the EdTech Throwdown. Join us, Eric Geis and Nick Johnson, as we dive into today's best EdTech tools, tips, and practices. We do the research so you can teach your class. Remember to follow us on social media like Instagram, X, or Facebook by looking for the handle @EdTech Throwdown. Now please enjoy the show.
Welcome to the EdTech Throwdown. This is episode 195 called Rethinking Research, Teaching Inquiry and Integrity in the Age of AI. In this episode, we will explore how the role of a teacher must change now that AI is becoming integrated in all aspects of our lives. Specifically, we'll share 8 changes that you can make to your classroom and assignments that will help encourage students to think creatively and critically in an age where it's more important than ever. This is another episode you don't want to miss. Check it out. All right, so we are here for episode 195, one of our summertime episodes, one of our summertime shorties, where we're just kind of reflecting on stuff from the past year, maybe starting to think ahead to the next year as well. And I think this episode hits both of those categories. I'll start off by giving you guys, and you, I guess, some background for where this episode idea came from. So picture this. It's the end of the school year. My students are doing what a lot of students are doing at this point, which is working on their final projects. For me, it's the culmination of, the AP Chem class. They're trying to find ways that chemistry can explain aspects of their lives, like the chemistry of, one kid did like bulletproof glass. That was one of the better ones that I saw. And it's super cool. It wraps it up in like a nice sort of a fun way, and it lets them sort of focus on what is important about science in general, but especially chemistry, which is explaining the world, right? The problem is, and I've talked about this before in other episodes, but it really started to, I just noticed it so much this year. As they were working on their projects and submitting proposals and coming up with titles, I noticed that every single project, I looked at like 40 some of these things, every single one, with the exception of a couple, were so technically perfect. The writing was solid. There wasn't a misplaced period. There wasn't a misplaced comma. Everything was perfect. I asked for them to have like 2, what I call chemistry connections, which is like 2 aspects of chemistry that they can, explain relative to their topic. And everybody had 2 explained very clearly and succinctly. The point of this is that they were almost too perfect, if you get what I'm saying. So
I get what you're saying.
I'll give you a couple guesses what was going on here.
Well, I think we all know what was going on here, but my question is because they were so perfect and there was no outside the box thinking, were they boring?
Yeah, for sure. Like some of them were boring, some were not, some were good. And, that's the weird part about this is like my overall reaction was, wow, these are really good. But also, they were only good because clearly the vast majority of these had been either AI researched, and some I could tell, and I addressed these because they were so obvious, but like kids were submitting some things that were AI just straight up written, and I dealt with that. It was a little bit easier because those were obvious. The harder ones was stuff like titles. Like I always ask for them to come up with a creative title because they always just do stuff like chemistry of bulletproof glass, chemistry of butter, which is fine, right? But one of the rubric points is a creative title. Well, this year, for the first time ever, everybody had these like super creative titles. And I pulled out one specific example. 4 years ago, it would have been a kid would do the chemistry of batteries. But this year, one of the titles for pretty much the chemistry of batteries was this. I'm just going to read it. 9 volts, 2 electrodes, 1 reaction, the chemistry behind the charge and the connection. It's a great title.
That is a great.
It's really good, but that kid, he didn't write that title. I can guarantee it. It also sounds like the type of title that ChatGPT comes up with. And it's just so weird for me because, like, their products are better, but they're not really doing them, or are they? You know what I'm saying? It's just such a strange thing.
I have a couple of things to say about this.
One,
if this isn't what you wanted, which you haven't really stated whether this is what you wanted or not, then isn't the flaw here within your description of the project?
Could be.
That would be the first thing.
Yep.
And secondly, what is the intent of this project? I mean, if you want them to get exposed to some new type of chemistry or something that is interesting within chemistry, I think this is still doing the trick. Now, I don't know how you laid out the guidelines for the usage of AI, but to me, if the process is more important than the content here, if the experience is more important, it is obvious that they are still getting that experience. They're still getting exposed to the content if it's kind of more of a laid-back final project. But if it's something that is, summative, we want to make sure that they got something out of this year and, it's a major grade, something like that. We might have some issues with the way that you've written your final project and what is due.
Those are great points, and they both, I think, hit on what this episode's all about. So, like, is the problem with my assignment? Yeah, probably. Like, I need to go back. I was really clear about what they can and can't use AI for, because we've done so much work with that, for our show and just as being tech coaches in general. So I was like prepped for that. But it did made me think that I need to go deeper and like redefine what the project is and what it asks of them to make it so that they can't use AI so extensively. So, that's totally worth it. And that's actually what this episode is all about. So I'll get back to that before we transition to segment 2. But the other thing, and that's really interesting, is like, what is the point of this project? It's for them to learn the underpinnings of chemistry that explains the world. And did they still do that even though AI was used? Yeah, I think they did. So does it really matter? And that's still a question mark for me. And another sort of thing that came out of this, there's a girl who was doing the chemistry of, I can't even think of her topic. It's like jellyfish or something, but as part of that, she was looking into the operation of cells within a jellyfish. That's what it was, for sure, jellyfish. And there's these pumps in a cell membrane. You probably know more about this than me. The sodium-potassium pump. Have you heard of those things?
I have.
Okay, so the problem with that is you can find lots of general information on a sodium-potassium pump in terms of how they work, but you can't really find like the deep chemistry of this thing. Most biological sources just talk very vaguely about the chemistry that's going on, and this group was struggling to find that chemistry. So they came to me and they were asking me if I knew the chemistry. I did not. I ran into the same walls they did, so guess what I did? I went to ChatGPT and asked it to explain the chemistry of sodium-potassium pumps at a deep level, and it did, right? So I found myself doing the thing that I told them not to do, and like in prior years, I probably would have given up. I would have said, this is too hard to find. You're going to spend so many hours that you don't have on this. Choose another topic. But this year, in about 5 seconds flat, we were able to find the chemistry of sodium-potassium pumps because of the AI. So like, I also have these super clear examples where it was definitively better and opened up doors that were not opened in the past. So it's just weird. It's about rethinking, and that's where this whole episode came from. What is research? How do you make it good and bad? How do you rewrite assignments? We put together a list of 8 things that we think people can incorporate. We're going to get into those in segment 2. But first, as always, let's pause for a word from the Teach Better Podcast Network.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
All right, so let's get started with this list of 8 things. These are going to apply generally to research projects. You'll notice that as we go through the list. We're going to try to keep it like non-specific in terms of content. I think most of these will sort of gear towards, like a secondary classroom just because of what it is, right? We're talking research, but I think there's some nuggets in here that are going to apply to younger students as well. So we're just going to bounce through these 8 things and hopefully a couple of them appeal to people. Of course, we'll try to throw in some tech tips and some just general teaching tips along the way. But the first one is when you do a research project in class, it's understanding these things that are going to now start happening, right? Understanding, like I said at the beginning, all of the stuff that I noticed that my students were doing and what was coming out. So you got to redefine that. And it's not really research anymore. It should be more about the questions being asked, what is commonly called inquiry, and focusing on that and on the information gathering, because the AI makes all that stuff so accessible for the kids. We have to shift the focus, away from the finding of the information, because as I explained with the sodium potassium pump thing, that can happen in the snap of a finger, and instead on choosing the right questions, really hitting on, what are you going to drill into in this project, the curiosity behind it, and making that more a part of the project itself than the hours that the kids used to have to spend researching. So that's one of the shifts that I think we need to make here for sure.
Yeah, and it does make sense. I mean, anytime that you're going into research, I think we need to focus on how they are collecting. And as times change, we have to reflect on this and see if what as a teacher is pertinent to our content. What is pertinent to the skills that they need to develop over the course of the year, they need to collect as they move forward in high school. So I think redefining research as inquiry is a good place to start, I should say.
Now, if you're like me, a lot of these tips can sound kind of vague, right? Like, okay, great. What does it mean to redefine research as inquiry? Like, I get it when you're saying it, but how does that actually show up in my project? Like, what's the real tangible takeaway from this? And a good idea, and I haven't tried this yet, but I'm going to be doing it next year for sure, in the exact project I described to you guys, is, I used to make students keep track of, sort of like, almost like a sources list, but it was more detailed, where they had to summarize all the info they got from each source. And I'm still going to do that. But as, along with that and in place of it now, sort of shifting that to a log where they keep track of their research question and how it develops over time. In other words, a student might start off and say, we're going to do the chemistry of jellyfish. So the first question in this log would be, what is the chemistry behind jellyfish? And then as they research that, probably on ChatGPT, I will require them to have ChatGPT give real sources, by the way. So sure, they can read the ChatGPT explanation, but also they got to go to, the place where that info is coming from and read that, because that just emphasizes those good research skills. But as part of this log, they've got to now change, like, okay, so I'm not really doing the chemistry behind jellyfish. I'm doing the chemistry of the stinging cells of jellyfish and how they function. And then how does that change an hour later after they've researched those things? So you're seeing the development of the question as a result of the very fast AI research. And I like that as a tangible thing teachers can do pretty simply.
Yeah, a couple episodes back, we talked about the AI Works Cited a little bit, and I think that's kind of what you're doing here with your research log. I have my students, when they're doing research, especially if they're using AI, and I have them start an additional Google Doc, and in that Google Doc, they'll copy and paste over any prompts that they use, any of the outputs that are given based on those prompts for everything that they research. And through AI. And I think this is important because it really opens the communication on how students are using these AI tools and also what writing is their own. So if they're up front with how they're using it and they can show that. Now, one of the problems we're running into is that there are age requirements on these tools that they're using. All right, so some of them are over 13, some of them are over 18. Well, if you have an account, which most of our students do not have accounts with their high school or their school email address because we don't permit them to, but they have it on their private, and maybe their parents allow them to have those. Let's just say in this case they do, so we all feel good about it. Well, if they don't have the accounts, they can't share the URL that has all that, but they can do a copy and paste, or they could ask ChatGPT to make it into a printable document or a digital document. All right, so we can do that, but I really like the idea of getting this into practice because we're able to tell a lot of different things by how they're using the AI tools, such as, are they good prompt engineers? Which we need to know. How do they interact with it? Is it more of an exploratory, or is it more, hey, I just want this information so I can turn this paper in? If they're asking intriguing questions to the AI, then, there's learning happening there. And that I see is very beneficial.
The prompt engineering is a cool thing too. Like our tip here was a research question development log. You could easily twist that into another idea, which is a log of the prompts that they've used so that you can see the types of questions they're asking. So that's that inquiry piece again, and how those change over time. So it's just, again, it's shifting that focus.
Yeah, so let's get into the next one since we spent a decent amount of time, and some of these we'll spend more time on than others. This one, to me, is pretty obvious. So it might, we might flash through this a little bit, but here it is. Teach AI literacy as part of research instruction. So students need to know how the AI tools work. They need to know their limitations, potentials for bias, or the ability to provide misinformation. This will help them think critically and evaluate how good that AI tool is, and, without just saying, oh, guess what? This is how it is, and it must be 100% correct. I'll give you a perfect example, and I'm not going to state a individual tool here. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is say, I found in most AI tools, if you put in any type of question, or if you're entering data or anything like that and it has Roman numerals, it really does not do well with Roman numerals, and a lot of times you're going to get stuff that is incorrect. That I found that was the case very early on. Maybe the AI is getting better, but that's one time when I'm noticing that we have a lot of false information there.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And as far as a concrete tip, like a takeaway, something you can do that goes along with this is, as part of your project description. So I've got like this for mine that I described, this 10-page document that walks them through all the different pieces and the rubrics and the exemplars, just tons of information. That document is about to have even more information because now within there's going to be a little section called AI literacy, where I'm actually going to put in some AI generated content that is similar to what the students might get when they start using ChatGPT to do their research for them, or with them at least. But these samples are ones that I've found that demonstrate how it can be wrong, how it can give you bad information, how there can be bias built in. So, my thinking is I'll just try some prompts that students typically do. It's going to take me a little bit of time, although I don't think too long, because I saw many examples of this as my students were working on this project. And I'm going to paste in what ChatGPT says, and then just like highlight the pieces of it that are incorrect or demonstrate some kind of a bias, so the students know that this is a thing, that, ChatGPT can sound very confident in what it's saying, but it is by no means foolproof. And then that, of course, leads into a requirement of the project itself, which will be, sure, you can read the AI summary, but you must constantly be going back to the source material, and officially that is where your project is being built from. So that is all now going to be part of the AI literacy thing. And I'll just add that it was really cool this year for the first time. I was having this conversation with a lot of kids, and they all seemed to know it. So I think this is, me sort of commending probably the English classes at our school, but maybe across the board, on teaching students this, because every time I would say that to students, they were like, yeah, I know I have to go read the actual source. So that's a good sign, right? The students seem to be aware of it, but I think the more we can say that as teachers, the better. So that was the second one. Let's do number 3, and this will be a fast one too, because you pretty much mentioned it already. This is the idea of requiring research process documentation. That is exactly what it sounds like, right? Instead of just grading that final product. So the paragraph long proposal that I read, that I could tell for sure was almost straight up copy pasted out of ChatGPT. Maybe you grade that less, or along with that, you grade the documentation of the research itself. So require students to put together, and here's the tip that goes along with this, a journal where they have to tell you, here's the first prompt that I tried, and then here's the development of those over time. Maybe they've got to put together a more detailed, almost like an annotated bibliography where there's all my sources from ChatGPT mixed in with the prompts, reflection checkpoints, and all of that builds this overall package where the student is still being forced to do a lot of the work that they've always done, but now documenting that work more than ever, knowing that AI is sort of taking a lot of that heavy lifting away. So we need to make sure they're still engaging with the content. So, it's tricky to have them document that, and you just have to maybe build out over time how they do it. And hopefully, like documenting the prompts in the development of those things is a good way to at least get started with that process.
Yeah, I think that is pretty awesome. I mean, when I'm just listening to you talk, I'm wondering if I can somehow put less emphasis on the final project as far as the grading goes. Because if we know that is like the culmination of everything that they've done, maybe the process is more important there than the final project at some point.
Yeah.
Especially if we want these kids to get better at AI prompt engineering. If that's what we want out of them and that's the goal of the assignment, make that the whole thing. All the prompts leading up to it is what gets them the points. Like,
right.
I'm not thinking of like a final research paper or a formal lab write-up. I'm just talking about in class when I go to teach AI, maybe the grade is on the prompt and not on the output.
Or how about this? What they turn in now is no longer the paragraph summary that they had to write, because obviously most of them would just have ChatGPT do it. What they turn in now is all the prompts and the development of their questions and all the research. And instead, in class, on a day, they still have to write that paragraph, but it's a no tech summary. So they sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil, or if you need them to type, then whatever lockdown browser your school uses, they write it live so that they've done all the research. Yes, they used AI, but the actual piece of writing happens in class during a very specific time. And this is what I think I'm actually going to do next year for this project. They've always turned in like a proposal. It's one paragraph. Well, now they're going to still do that, but I'm going to make them write it in class over like a 15-minute period. So it's like an assessment in that moment of how well they understand all the research that they did. And that's really like the best example of what we mean with this episode, and like shifting what the project is?
I think for me, I'm going to do the opposite.
Okay.
I'm going to make them do all these trial and errors with the prompt. And then I'm going to say, okay, you're going to collect all this stuff. You need to know exactly what you want at the end, what your outsourced paper is, like what the output is. And when you come to class, you are going to write the most epic prompt ever. You're going to have, 10 minutes to write the best prompt to answer your project proposal or whatever. And then based on your prompt and what you know about, because really a prompt is getting very detailed, what they want to know about. And sometimes you need to feed it some information in order to get a good output. Like you need to know the facts. So what I'm going to say is, all right, you have 5 minutes based on all the research and all the AI stuff that you've done to this point. You have 5 or 10 minutes to give me your prompt. And then what we're going to do is I'll take, since they're going to write it, we could have them write it.
Yeah.
Then what I'll do is I'll do Google Lens. They'll take a picture of their prompt. I'll use Google Lens to grab the text. And then we put it directly into ChatGPT. We hit enter. And whoever is the best one, or the best, if there's 12 kids in your class, top 4 get an A, next 4 get a B, next 4 get a C for that small project.
That's cool. It's almost like then the prompt is the new product.
Yes.
Which totally flips everything around, but that's
kind of where we're at this point.
Yeah, that's a great example. The next one is, all of these kind of start to roll together too, so you'll hopefully notice that as we go through, and that's one of the cool parts about it. But as you're doing this and you are literally flipping these things around, you want to be able to emphasize the evaluation of the source over almost anything else. I've said that next year I'm going to especially drive home that all of their, they can use that ChatGPT, but they need to be looking at the source material. Part of this should be like specifically addressing, if ChatGPT directed me to this particular website where I'm technically pulling information from, do I trust this in why? I've never cared about that before because I've never had to worry that much before about how much of this work they're actually doing themselves. But now that I do have to worry about that a whole lot, this for me is more important than ever. Now, if you're an English or a history teacher, this is probably already built in, so you don't really have to, do as much work there. But in the science world, this is going to be more important. So just requiring students to justify each of their sources. For me, I'm actually going to require like a tailor-made, like a works cited, but one that I designed where each source listed, there has to be a justification of, what makes this good. And it can be short. It doesn't have to be extensive. In fact, I hope they're not. But something as simple as, I can see that this website is published by Rice University or whatever it is, and that it was updated last year. So this is likely very good information. Just a sentence, but actually making them do that where I've never actually made them do it before, again, is putting more emphasis on the process rather than the final product.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone. I think you did a great job. I'm going to get into the next one, which is assigned synthesis over summary. All right, for this one, you have AI, which does a great job at summarizing. That's what it kind of started as that for a lot of people. So students must be pushed to synthesize the information even further. What does this mean? It means after the students are done, say they turn in that final project or whatever, or they complete a task, the teacher tip here is to get them to do the so what. And that's where they go, okay, out of all this information that was presented, let's take it a step deeper. What else do you know from this? What do you know from source A and source B? Compare them. Which one do you think has a more compelling argument? which one actually sheds more light onto it. So you're getting the students to compare and contrast that. And I would do this afterwards. They turn in their paper, and then I give them 3 follow-up questions where it lists something where they have to compare and contrast or just synthesize all the resources that they used. Or if they turned in multiple different graphs or data points or data sources, compare those. Which one has the most compelling argument that justifies your question or your claim? Do something along those lines where it wouldn't necessarily be there. That could also be handwritten. If you haven't realized yet, we're using handwriting in real time as part of our, as part of our whole defense against AI. You could always have them take pictures of their writing. If you want to read it digitally, you can have them do that and turn in the pictures. And like I said earlier, you could use Google Lens to grab the text, which can also make this a lot easier on you if that's the way that you want to go.
So let's have that actually roll into our 6th one, because they kind of mesh together. And that is when they're doing the so what, like you just talked about, at the conclusion, you want to do things, certain pieces of it, you can do it live. Require them to do that in class, paper and pencil writing, short, sweet. They know it's coming. You can even, you want to announce that in advance. You're not trying to stress them out. But they should know that the understanding matters. So you can't, sure, you can let ChatGPT explain it to you, almost flawlessly in a matter of seconds or minutes. But you, the human, still has to be responsible for that information. Reading it, rewriting it, synthesizing it, understanding the so what. So building in those in-class writing moments. And if you really, for the teachers that are super worried about, the rigor of school is totally evaporating, it doesn't have to. And that's something else this whole episode is about. Good way around that is require an in-class oral defense of their topic or the response to their question, where instead of that in-class writing, they have to get up and basically do an impromptu verbal summary of everything they've learned so far, where questions are asked, probably by you, but maybe by the other students, maybe to a panel of teachers. If you really want to make it scary, you want to talk about maintaining academic rigor in a world where AI is a thing. That's one of the best ways to do that at the conclusion of all this research periods. And I love to throw that one out to teachers who are super worried about, the disappearance of, the rigor that they think used to be there. There's certainly still ways to incorporate that.
It's almost like a dissertation defense.
For sure.
At the end. I like that. I like that a lot, because if you don't know the content, you're not going to be able to talk about it. It's going to be super obvious. I mean, when I look at people talking, I could tell whether they're just nervous or if they don't know the information. And there's a big difference between that. And I think that would definitely be a way to make sure that, they really did their work and they understand what they researched. All right. The next one is require human and AI source transparency. We went over this a couple of different ways during this episode, but one thing we do need to highlight here is that it needs to start with the teacher. The teacher needs to have some type of usage statement at the beginning of every project. You need to be clear about the uses of AI and what is and what is not allowed. And the students need to be able to clearly understand what they can and cannot do. That's part of this process. So make sure that it's in your syllabus. If it's course-based, make sure it's in every individual project. I would try to stay away from not allowing AI at all, because you're going to get into a lot of trouble there, because there are tools out there that we've been using for a long time that has used AI, such as the spelling grammar checkers. They're now becoming more and more complex, and now it's suggesting different word usages and tones and things like that. So if you get into that, a lot of those tools have to be vetted and thrown out, really, if you do not want AI to be used at all. So just make sure that the transparency is there, not only on the student's part, but the teacher part. Students can do their AI works cited or their log, or they can copy and paste in their prompts and the outputs from their prompts and things like that. But transparency must be there.
And the last one, which I think is my favorite one out of this entire list of 8, so I hope we had a lot of people make it to the end of this episode. When you're designing your project task or descriptions, you want to make it creative, personalized, and here's the key piece, localized in such a way that they can ask AI as much as they want, but you've made it so oriented towards maybe the school, the classroom, the community, the town, the city, the state, that AI just can't do that part for them. In other words, I might still have students do the chemistry of jellyfish, and this isn't going to make any sense, but as a requirement of the project, they've got to explain how that impacts the, something within the town where the school exists, or an organization or business that functions out of our area, our community. Because in order to do that, they have to be the ones to synthesize all the information that AI helps them to understand and research. And they have to be able to apply that information to this local issue in a way that AI probably can't, or at least is going to have a much harder time with. And I wish I could give a specific example of how that's going to work. For me, in my chemistry project, I just can't, because I haven't thought about it that deeply. My only, initial musing on this is that chemistry can be used to solve, so many problems environmentally and medically, that I'm going to maybe tailor the project to where it has to be the chemistry behind some way to solve a problem that is happening in Mercer County, New Jersey. And it's got to be current, and it's got to be real. And that way, they're still using AI for the research, but the application, the critical thinking, they must do at a local level. And that just checks off so many amazing boxes for education. I don't know why I haven't been doing it that way all along. And I think it's a good last one to bring up.
Yeah, and the thing that you're mentioning here is really, it's STEM research.
Right.
It's the STEM pathway. And I think that would be a great project and a great, just ways to get them interested. They seem to really like the STEM pathway and the STEM research and the ways of doing things. But that's going to wrap up this episode of the EdTech Throwdown. So hopefully this summer, when you're reflecting on all the research projects that you're doing in your classroom, you continue to reflect on ways that you can bring AI into your classrooms in a safe way with your students. Till next time, go check us out on all the social medias. We have a YouTube channel. We're on every podcast catcher that you can think of, that we can think of, that we can connect ourselves to. But we hope you're enjoying your summer. Check us out in another 2 weeks. Thanks for listening to the EdTech Throwdown. Do us a couple of favors. Subscribe to our podcast on any major podcast catcher such as Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, and Stitcher. Go over to YouTube, search the EdTech Throwdown, subscribe to the channel. You can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The show's handle is EdTech Throwdown. You can connect with Geis at GeisGotTech, Nick at NickGotTech. You can write us an Apple Podcast review. You can tell your friends about www.edtechthrowdown.com. And lastly, go over and check out our friends over at the Teach Better Podcast Network, a network that we are so proudly involved with. Until next time, remember, go try some EdTech, because we will do the research so you can teach your class.